Rome controlled the known world for 500 years, until debt destroyed it from within. Spain built the first global empire on mountains of silver, then went bankrupt 4 times in 50 years. America became the richest nation in history, and now owes $34 trillion it can never repay. 3 empires, 3 centuries, one ending. History has a script for empires, and it's been playing on repeat for over 2,000 years. It starts with expansion, territories conquered, enemies defeated, wealth flowing in. Then comes the Golden Age, where power feels permanent and dominance seems natural. But underneath the glory, a poison is building. Debt. Every great empire has borrowed its way to the top, and every single one has borrowed its way to the bottom. The names change, the languages change, the currencies change, but the mathematics never do. Debt compounds, interest accumulates. And eventually, the empire isn't financing greatness anymore, it's just financing survival. Rome knew this ending, Spain lived through it. And America? America is writing the same final chapter right now, just with different numbers and different excuses. The question isn't whether the pattern repeats. The question is whether anyone is paying attention. Let's start with Rome, because Rome is where the debt spiral first played out on a truly global scale. At its height in the 2nd century AD, Rome controlled an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. Its legions were unmatched, its roads connected the known world, and its currency, the silver denarius, was trusted across 3 continents. But running an empire is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads had to be maintained, borders had to be defended, and Rome's ambitions never stopped. By the 3rd century, the empire was locked in endless wars against Germanic tribes in the north, Persians in the east, internal revolts everywhere. The costs were staggering, and tax revenue couldn't keep up. So Rome did what every empire does when it runs out of money. It borrowed from the future. But Rome didn't have bond markets or central banks. It had something cruder: currency debasement. Emperors began reducing the silver content of the denarius, mixing in cheaper metals, stretching the same amount of real value across more coins. At first, the change was subtle. A denarius under Emperor Augustus contained about 95% silver. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 200s AD, it had dropped to 50%. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in the 260s, the denarius was barely 5% silver, a coin in name only. This was inflation in its rawest form. Prices exploded because money had lost its anchor. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. Soldiers demanded higher wages, but those wages were paid in the same debased coins, which bought even less by the time they reached the troops. Merchants stopped accepting imperial currency and reverted to barter. The economy fractured. And here's the critical point: this wasn't an accident, it was policy. The emperors knew what they were doing. They chose to debase the currency because raising taxes would have sparked revolt, and cutting military spending would have invited invasion. Debt, hidden as inflation, was the only politically viable option. But it destroyed the foundation of trust that held the economy together. By the crisis of the 3rd century, Rome was collapsing not from external enemies, but from internal rot. The money was worthless, trade had broken down, the army was unreliable, and the empire, once the greatest power on earth, was tearing itself apart. When the Western Roman Empire finally fell in 476 AD, the collapse wasn't caused by barbarians alone. It was caused by a treasury that could no longer pay for the illusion of strength. Fast forward 1,000 years and a new empire rises: Spain. In the 16th century, Spain built the first truly global empire. It stretched across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And it controlled something Rome never had: an almost infinite supply of precious metals. The conquest of Mexico and Peru gave Spain access to the silver mines of Zacatecas and Potosí, and treasure fleets carried mountains of bullion back to Seville. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported an estimated 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold. To put that in perspective, that's more silver than all of Europe had mined in the previous millennium. Spain was, by any measure, the richest empire the world had ever seen. And yet, within a single century, Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times. in 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. How does the richest empire on earth go bankrupt? Because treasure is not wealth, and Spain confused the two. Here's what happened. Spain's Habsburg monarchs saw themselves as defenders of Catholic Europe, locked in endless religious wars against Protestant England, the Dutch Republic, and the Ottoman Empire. These wars were staggeringly expensive. The Spanish Armada of 1588 alone cost millions of ducats, the equivalent of billions today. And that was just one campaign. The wars never stopped. Spain's kings borrowed heavily against future silver shipments. German banking families like the Fuggers and later Genoese financiers advanced enormous loans to the crown, secured by the promise that treasure fleets would arrive and debts would be repaid. It was a high-stakes gamble. And it worked until it didn't. The problem was twofold. First, the silver never stayed in Spain. It flowed out immediately to pay foreign creditors, buy imported goods, and finance wars abroad. Spain consumed more than it produced, turning itself into a distribution hub for wealth that enriched everyone except Spaniards. Second, the flood of silver caused massive inflation, the price revolution. Prices quadrupled across Europe in the 16th century, and Spain, as the source of the silver, suffered worst of all. Ordinary Spaniards found themselves unable to afford bread even as their king sat on a mountain of bullion. And then there were the pirates. English privateers like Francis Drake and Dutch corsairs like Piet Hein turned Spain's treasure fleets into floating targets. In 1628, Piet Hein captured an entire Spanish convoy off Cuba, seizing 11 million guilders worth of silver in a single raid. When a treasure fleet was lost, Spain couldn't repay its creditors. Defaults cascaded, confidence collapsed, and the cycle repeated. By the mid-17th century, Spain was a hollow shell. It still held vast territories, but it lacked the financial muscle to defend or develop them. The empire that had once terrified Europe became a cautionary tale. All the silver in the world couldn't save an empire drowning in debt. Now let's talk about America. The United States emerged from World War II as the unquestioned superpower. It held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Its currency became the global standard under the Bretton Woods system. And for a brief, shining moment, the dollar was as good as gold, literally convertible at $35 per ounce. But empires are expensive. America fought the Cold War, financed NATO, and waged conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. It built a global military presence with over 800 bases worldwide. And it promised its citizens a standard of living unmatched in history. Social Security, Medicare, infrastructure, subsidies. By the 1960s, the bills were piling up. President Lyndon Johnson wanted both guns and butter, the Vietnam War abroad, and the Great Society at home. But the math didn't work. The US was spending more than it earned, and foreign governments holding dollars began to notice. They started demanding gold in exchange for paper, testing the promise that America would honor convertibility. In 1971, Richard Nixon ended the gold standard. He closed the gold window, declaring that foreign governments could no longer redeem dollars for gold. It was, in effect, a default. From that moment on, the dollar became a fiat currency, backed not by metal but by trust in the US government. And what has happened since? The debt has exploded. In 1971, the national debt was $398 billion. By 2000, it had grown to $5.6 trillion. By 2008, it was $10 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. And today, in 2025, the national debt exceeds $34 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of the United States. It's more than the combined economies of China, Japan, and Germany. But here's the crucial difference between America and Rome or Spain. America borrows in its own currency. Rome debased coins. Spain exhausted silver mines. America prints dollars, and the world still accepts them. Why? Because the dollar is the global reserve currency. Oil is priced in dollars. International trade is settled in dollars. Central banks hold dollars as their safest asset. This gives America an extraordinary privilege. It can run deficits indefinitely, printing money to cover the gap as long as global trust in the dollar holds. It's a power no empire has ever had before. But it's also a trap, because the moment that trust cracks, the entire system collapses. So, what's the pattern? What connects Rome, Spain, and America across 2,000 years? It starts with expansion. Empires grow through conquest, trade, or innovation. Wealth flows in, confidence builds, and borrowing seems safe because the empire is rising. Then comes overreach. The empire takes on more than it can sustain. Too many wars, too many promises, too many obligations. But cutting back feels like decline, so the empire borrows to maintain the illusion of strength. Next is the trap. Debt starts to compound. Interest payments consume a larger share of revenue. The empire isn't borrowing for growth anymore, it's borrowing just to service old debts. This is where Rome was in the 3rd century. This is where Spain was in the 1550s. And this is where America is now. Finally comes the breaking point. Something snaps. A war goes badly, a financial shock hits, creditors lose faith, and the empire discovers that debt isn't just a number on a ledger, it's a leash that chokes the future. Rome tried to escape through debasement. Spain tried to escape through more treasure fleets. America is trying to escape through money printing and debt rollover. But history says there are only 3 ways this ends: inflate the debt away, restructure and default, or face collapse. Every empire believes it's the exception. Rome thought its legions made it eternal. Spain thought its silver made it invincible. And America? America thinks the dollar's global dominance makes it untouchable. And there's some truth to that. The dollar is still the reserve currency. U.S. Treasury bonds are still considered the world's safest asset. The U.S. can borrow at lower rates than any other nation because the world believes in its ability to repay, or at least to keep rolling over the debt indefinitely. But cracks are forming. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar. Central banks are buying gold at record rates, diversifying away from U.S. treasuries. The BRICS nations are exploring alternatives to dollar-based trade. And domestically, the U.S. is spending more on interest payments than on defense, a sign that debt servicing is crowding out everything else. America isn't immune to the debt spiral. It's just moving through it with more tools than Rome or Spain ever had. But tools aren't solutions. Printing money doesn't create wealth. Borrowing from the future doesn't erase the bill. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. So, what should you take from this? 3 empires, 3 centuries, 1 ending. The script has been written, and America is following it line by line. First, understand that debt is not neutral. It's a claim on the future. Every dollar borrowed today is a dollar taken from tomorrow, plus interest. And when an empire borrows beyond its ability to repay, it's not the creditors who suffer, it's the citizens. Through inflation, austerity, or collapse, the debt always gets paid. The only question is who pays it. Second, recognize that all empires believe they're different. Rome thought its legions were invincible until they weren't. Spain thought its treasure fleets would last forever until they didn't. America thinks the dollar's dominance is permanent, but permanence is an illusion. Systems built on debt are inherently unstable, and history shows that trust once lost evaporates fast. Third, prepare yourself. If you're waiting for the system to fix itself, you're waiting for something that has never happened in history. Empires don't reform, they collapse, reset, or inflate. The survivors aren't the ones who trusted most. They're the ones who saw the pattern and acted before it was too late. Build real wealth that survives outside the debt system. Skills that create value. Assets that hold worth when currencies fail. Knowledge that lets you see the trap before it closes. Because history doesn't repeat exactly, but the rhythms are unmistakable. Rome fell because it couldn't pay its legions. Spain went bankrupt 4 times in 50 years despite drowning in silver. America owes $34 trillion and counting. 3 empires, 3 centuries, 1 spiral. The ending is already written. The only question is whether you'll see it coming. History has the answers. Will you listen?